We're on page 2 now, question 3 and 4, and we're presented with a graph and asked to describe the domain and range. Domain, remember, is just a fancy math word for what x values do you see? What x values are part of the picture? So you might just want to mark up your graph like this. Remember, the x values are from the x-axis, so we go left to right, say what's the lowest x value, what's the highest x values, do we skip anything? And you could mark the bottom edge of the paper like this. The open circle means that we don't actually get to the value -5. We start just to the right of -5. That would be a round bracket at -5. And we get all those x values from -5 all the way up to and including 0. So we would use a square bracket for that. Now that looks silly, but we'll put that together and make it look nice in just a minute. There's a gap between 0 and right here, which is at +1. So we do get +1 exactly. And then the x values continue until we get right here, which of course is x value +2. It's a filled in point also. 3 filled in points, 1 open circle. So the 2 is also included. And using interval notation means we want this interval together with this interval. So we would use a little union symbol there. So the domain is -5, 0, square bracket, union with, square bracket, everything in between 1 and 2, and also those endpoints, 1 and 2. The range is the usually for students more challenging thing, but the range is just what y values do you see? What's the lowest y value? Go from the lowest to the highest, and of course, if there's any gaps, acknowledge those. But if you look at the picture, and you could do this. I've seen some people do this, and it's kind of handy. Turn it sideways and then go from left to right. There's your lowest y value, there's your highest. There's some overlap here, so that's interesting. It starts at just to the right of, or just above, really, I should say, -4. So a round bracket there. And then it continues all the way till we get to -1, and at the same time we're getting those same y values there. And since we're just reporting every possible y value, we can just kind of ignore that overlap. It's not important. Y values continue until we get to this one, the one furthest to the right, or if we put it back this way, the highest y value is exactly 5, and it's included. So the range here goes from lowest value -4 to highest value +5, and does not have any missing y values in between, no gap. Another thing I've seen done is if you got a good visual imagination, if you could imagine taking the graph and just kind of flattening it over to the y-axis, I take this whole graph and move it over here, and this whole graph and move it over here, right onto the y-axis. There's your range from just above -4 all the way up to and including +5. So some of you might find that helpful. The second graph, it's all points, and the domain means the same thing. What x values do we see? We see -3 and 2 and 3, but it's not an interval, it's distinct points. And so we use these curly brackets to indicate that it's just going to be a list of things separated by commas. So what's in our list for the domain? The numbers -3 and 2 and positive 3. Those are the only x values that show up in this graph. And the range will be the collection of all the y values, and we use the same notation, the curly bracket. And then what y values do we see? I see y value negative 3, and I see y value 0, and positive 1, and finally positive 3. And like we did with the graph above, you can turn it sideways, go left to right, say, what's my range? This number, this number, this number, this number. Negative 3, 0, 1, and 3. Same final report when we get all done. So that's the end of page 2.